Our third founding father of psychology is none other than Sigmund Freud, who is one of the biggest figures in the history of psychology. And if you're studying anything about the history of psychology, I mean, you should understand Freud. So we got several lessons on Sigmund Freud. All right, so let's jump into that. You got your note sheet. You should be taking some notes, and of course, after you're done, they will be practice. All right, birth and death. Remember, we're not going to be quizzed on that, but just to give context here, notice that the dates are starting to be a little bit into the 20th century. Birth was 1856, so now we're mid 19th century, and then he dies in 1939. Nationality, he's Austrian. He is Jewish, in German Jew. Okay, so he's German, and actually because of that, he kind of runs into some troubles because Austria in 1936 will be taken over by the Nazis. And so Sigmund Freud will find himself in a very precarious situation, being a famous Jewish psychologist that, frankly, Hitler kind of hates. So, in 1936, the Unschloose happens, which is when Austria joins with Germany, and basically the Nazis stormed in. And you can see here book burnings that the Nazi youth did, and they often burned Sigmund Freud's book. So he knew he was not in a good situation, and he had to flee over the border into Switzerland as the Germans' takeover of Austria happened. So kind of an interesting little tidbit how history overlapped here with world events, I should say, overlapped here with Sigmund Freud. By the time this happened, he was toward the end of his life because we're talking 1936. He only died 3 years later. Eventually, most of his family will make it to Canada. All right. He is the founder of another branch of psychology called psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis. And again, it brings us closer and closer to the more modern view of psychology. Although some of the things Freud came up with are not followed today and are seen not really practiced as much either. It's like he was almost wrong about everything, yet he also is one of the great founders of psychology. Um, this focuses on this is psychoanalysis. Now, remember, we have structuralism, we have functionalism, now we have psychoanalysis, and you have to really be able to associate those things with each of those founders. And he focuses on the unconscious and the subconscious mind. So the other two people we talked about, James and Wundt, they focused on consciousness and like our awareness of the world around us. Well, now Sigmund Freud gets hung up on the unconscious mind, the aspects about us that we don't even realize are there, but these things are important according to Freud because they motivate us and the reason we do things. And then the subconscious, which he also called preconscious, are the things just below the surface that are just there that sometimes come to the surface, but we're kind of aware of them, but not always. All right. His treatments, which really kind of bring again us forward into what modern psychology is, it was dialogue or talking between the patient and the psychoanalyst. So that kind of starts to sound like modern psychology, this idea of a psychoanalyst or a psychologist talking with a patient. That was an important thing for Freud. So that's going to now become the practice, and that is because of Freud. It's going to look different than what Freud tried to do, as we'll see, but it still becomes the norm. A couple other interesting things about Freud. Don't have to write these down, but a couple and the first one is almost laughable, but there was kind of a rage in the late 19th century with cocaine. And Sigmund Freud, who was trained as a medical doctor actually originally, he claimed in the 1880s that cocaine was a wonder drug. And matter of fact, the picture in the middle is actually Freud giving a prescription of cocaine to someone. Yeah, he actually used it as well. He suggested it was good for anesthesia, depression, ingestion, asthma, neurosis, syphilis, drug addiction, and alcohol addiction, which I love the last two. The fact that cocaine is good for drug addiction and alcohol addiction, sure, because once you use cocaine, you'll be addicted to it, and then you won't have to worry about the addiction to the other things. And of course, you might have heard that in the uh, original Coca-Cola, it actually was used in original Coke, which is where they got the name Coke. But eventually, in the early 1900s, it was actually taken out. I think like 1905 or something. By then, it was gone. All right, so yeah, it's pretty crazy. Um, all right, and then another thing, a story that you need to be familiar with that is really important is the case of Anna O, because this is what's going to really change psychology, and it also is going to change Freud's view of psychology and being a doctor. And so there was a woman, and you see her in the upper right hand corner. Her name is Anna O, and Freud at the time was working under Dr. Joseph Breuer, who was a medical doctor and was getting his training from him. And Anna O came to them suffering from hysteria, which was just a way to say she is having mental problems. And she had different symptoms: convulsions, paralysis, hallucinations, loss of speech. She was having some sort of major medical psychotic episodes, basically. They couldn't come up with an apparent physical cause. And so Brewer led Anna in talk therapy, and you can actually see the old room here that they used. And she would sit down on that couch and talk to him in order to recall forgotten traumatic experiences. Because the theory that Brewer and Freud were having was that somehow there was some trauma in Anna O's past, and this trauma was causing the hysteria. And then one thing that they found out was that she feared drinking water because when she was younger, a dog she really hated drank from her cup, and she was so grossed out by it that like she just couldn't drink water. So that was like one traumatic experience that came up through the talk therapy. Another experience that she came up with was that her brother died of tuberculosis when she was 8, and later her father died of tuberculosis while she was caring for him. So therefore, she had two family members die when she was young, and she helped care for both of them. And so you got quite a bit of trauma here going on. And what happened was is that once Anna O expressed her unconscious memories of all this and talked out these traumatic experiences, suddenly the symptoms disappeared. And so this is where Freud started to come up with two ideas. One, what's going on in our mind in the unconscious, things that we've forgotten, is affecting our behavior. And then two, or even causing psychotic episodes. And then number two, the idea of talking it out and trying to discover these unconscious memories is a way to heal somebody. All right, so that's our first lesson on Sigmund Freud. We have a lot of lessons left because he's very interesting. Bye.